looking even dumber than usual. Did you really think you'd be staying with us? Didn't I tell you it was a family trip today? I had been looking forward to this family trip amidst all the harassment. I had driven for hours thinking staying in a famous hotel would be worth it. But when we arrived, there were only reservations for my in-laws and my husband, not for me. My mother-in-law coldly told me I was no longer needed and should leave. There I was, left alone in the grand lobby, feeling utterly miserable. My name is Rolla. An only child, I lost my father in an accident when I was young, and was raised by my mother single-handedly. Now 31, I am married and live away from home. I met my husband Jack, who was the same age as me at work, and we got married. Back when we were dating, I admired Jack for having strong opinions. I found his decisiveness reassuring. However, after we got married, this very trait began to be a source of my suffering. Growing up, it was just my mother and me helping each other out. This upbringing made me, if anything, a person who's good at listening and accommodating others. I tend to avoid inconveniencing others or causing conflicts, almost subconsciously. Knowing my nature, Jack, after our marriage, began making decisions on his own, even those important to me. Take work, for instance. While dating, he supported my career, but after marriage, he suddenly demanded I quit. When I didn't agree, he went around telling my in-laws, colleagues, and even my boss that I was quitting. At work, they asked, "Congrats on your marriage. You're leaving at the end of the month, right?" And at home, it was, "Quit already." So I tearfully gave up my job. Furthermore, one day Jack suddenly decided we were going to move in with his parents. He announced this out of the blue, saying we had to vacate our current apartment this month and start packing immediately. Naturally, I was dissatisfied with Jack's impulsive decisions, but my fear of confrontation prevented me from protesting strongly. Just being newly married, I felt my self-esteem erode every time Jack said, "I made the decision because you didn't." After moving in, even my in-laws began to oppress me. I found myself living in a world full of adversaries, following their orders like a puppet. My compliance led to increasingly worse treatment, and the harassment at my in-laws' house quickly escalated. I couldn't stand such a life, and within a few months of moving in, told Jack I wanted a divorce and to return to my parents. Jack shook his head and mocked me. "Do you realize how hard it is to raise a child alone? Your mom gave up her time and love to raise you, and now you want to come back so soon after getting married. Imagine her despair. Well, if you don't care about her suffering, I won't stop you." He left, mocking my inability to respond, ending the conversation. Alone, I pondered Jack's words. In fact, my mother recently started dating someone considering marriage. Now that I was married, she could finally focus on her own happiness. I couldn't disturb that. Telling myself it would be fine as long as I endured, I put up with the treatment at my in-laws for about a year. Then one day, Tom suggested we go on a family trip. This was my first trip since getting married, but considering how I've been treated so far, I expected to be used for chores like carrying luggage and souvenirs. However, the thought of eating a meal prepared by someone else made me a bit excited. At my in-laws, I was always left behind to look after the house while the three of them dined out. And maybe I could enjoy a long, warm bath at the hotel. As I listened to the three of them excitedly discussing which hotel to choose, I did my chores with a small glimmer of hope in my heart. On the day of the trip, I was naturally assigned to be the driver. It was fine by itself, but Jack and Tom, despite having licenses, didn't offer to take turns, leaving me to drive the long journey alone. Our breaks on the way there were rushed to fit their schedule, and by the time we arrived at the hotel, I was exhausted, barely managing to pull Mary's large suitcase inside. The hotel, being a luxurious one, shone with its beautiful interior and soft lighting. I took a deep breath, soothed by the elegant fragrance enveloping the lobby, looking forward to the extraordinary time I was about to spend. Having held the steering wheel for hours, my eyes were tired, and my back and legs ached considerably. I wanted to quickly get to my room and stretch out without anyone watching, but I knew these people would probably drag me out for sightseeing, disregarding my exhaustion, just using me as a porter. I sighed quietly, careful not to be noticed by Mary, who was busy taking photos of the paintings and flowers in the lobby. As I waited for Mary, who was happily snapping pictures here and there, Jack, apparently done with checking, called her over with a gesture. Tom, standing next to Jack and proud of his hotel choice, was smiling in a way I had never seen before. I hurried over to them, pulling Mary's suitcase, thinking it would be nice if the three of them stayed in a good mood during the trip. When I reached the counter, Mary took the suitcase, saying, "That's enough." What followed next was unbelievable. "You can go back now, but be here around 10 a.m. the day after tomorrow." Excuse me? Confused, I stared back at Mary. Then she burst out laughing. Looking even dumber than usual. "Did you really think you'd be staying with us? Didn't I tell you it was a family trip today?" As I stood there, unable to articulate my confusion, Tom and Jack, who had started walking a few steps ahead, turned back. Jack smirked nastily while Tom tilted his head mockingly and opened his mouth. "Come on, a lowly woman raised by a single mother surely doesn't think she'd stay in such a luxurious hotel with us, right? You should be grateful just for being allowed into the lobby. A first-class hotel indeed has a big heart." Tom clapped his hands, clearly pleased. From the corner of my eye, I saw other guests and staff watching us, and I looked down in embarrassment. Seeing this, Jack laughed through his nose, saying it was useless to cry. "We're a family of 3, so it's only natural we booked for 3, right? You're an adult. If you wanted to stay, you should have booked your own room. Though I doubt such a famous hotel would have any vacancies now." After ridiculing me to their heart's content, they said, "We'll call you when we're ready to leave, so wait nearby and be ready to pick us up," and left for their room. Once they were out of sight, I felt my strength drain away, and I slumped into a nearby chair. Even the luggage, which was only a third of Mary's, felt incredibly heavy. I sighed deeply, as if expelling all the negative emotions within me, and stood up to leave the place. A staff member who saw me getting up came over at a brisk pace and kindly offered me to rest in a sofa space tucked away in the back of the lobby. After resting for a while, I went to thank the staff member, who then relayed Tom's words to me. Apparently, Tom had said that I would pay. But having seen our earlier interaction, the staff member hesitantly suggested that I discuss it again with the staying guests, and combine it with the checkout payment as part of the hotel service. After driving alone for several hours, I finally returned home, and suddenly found myself overwhelmed with tears. I cried, not knowing if it was out of sadness or frustration, for being told face to face that I wasn't part of the family, and for being belittled for being raised in a single-parent household. I don't know how long I cried, but after a while I realized something important. I was all alone now. Lonely, but free from people who would criticize my upbringing or hit me for being slow at chores. No matter what I did or didn't do, there was no one to say anything. It was a refreshing feeling. If I was forced to quit my job, I could just start a new one. If I didn't want to live with my family or husband, I could just leave. If I didn't want to trouble my mother, I could live on my own. Feeling suddenly empowered, I blocked Mary's number, refusing to run away anymore, and hastily began packing to leave the house. 3 days later, it was the day my in-laws were supposed to check out of the hotel. Even after the time they were supposed to contact me had passed, no one called my mobile phone. This was because I had blocked not only Mary, but also my husband and Tom. Every now and then I found myself glancing at my phone, but the thought of not having to hear their voices brought a sense of relief. However, I started receiving calls from an unknown number. Curious about the repeated calls, I checked and found out that the number belonged to the police station, overseeing the area where the hotel was located. Wondering why the police would call me, I answered and learned that my in-laws had gotten lost in the mountains and were now under their protection. They wanted me to come and pick them up. It seems that the three of them, unable to contact me due to my call block, had to pay their own hotel bill. However, with no car to pick them up, they were left without a way to return home. They decided to head to the train station, but because they had indulged in various additional services during their stay, they had incurred substantial expenses. To save on taxi fare, they decided to walk to the nearest town. However, they took a shortcut and ended up getting completely lost in the mountains. Luckily, they were in a place with cell signal and were quickly rescued, but they were furious, blaming me for abandoning them, as the police officer informed me with a wry smile. Thinking they should have just made their way back on their own since they had safely descended the mountain, but lacking both money and energy, the three of them, unable to contact their quarrelsome wife, asked the police to intervene. I resigned myself to the fact that they were, after all, family, and went to pick them up. Upon meeting, they were furious, but I was no longer intimidated and ignored Jack's mother while thrusting divorce papers at Jack. When I indicated my intention to divorce, Jack sneered arrogantly and raised his fist, but restrained himself, realizing we were at the police station. Jack, seeing the police officers in his line of sight, must have realized he couldn't do anything foolish. He then tried to laugh it off and play down the situation. "Just kidding, are you still angry about the other day? She really holds a grudge, you know." While the officers present started persuading me to reconsider the divorce. But I was firm in my decision and declared that I would leave them there if Jack did not sign the divorce papers. Reluctantly, he signed. As we left the police station, I found myself surrounded by Jack and the others. "How dare you, as his wife? Not only did you not come to pick us up, but you also didn't pay for the hotel. Who do you think provided you with a life of food, clothing, and shelter?" Mary, fuming, demanded I put her suitcase in the car. I used to shrink under the accusations, but now I knew I didn't have to. "You just signed the divorce papers, right? So we're strangers now. I have no obligation to help you," I said firmly. Jack lunged at me in anger, but my mother intervened. When I left home, I hadn't told her why I needed to stay for one night, but she became concerned because of my many belongings, and I ended up telling her everything. My mother scolded me for not speaking up sooner, cried with happiness that I had returned, and commended my endurance and courage for choosing divorce. The in-laws, surprised by my mother's presence, openly questioned why she was there. My mother boldly replied that she came to see the people who had made her daughter suffer. But Jack and his family looked down on my mother as they had on me, only laughing mockingly. They even began demanding compensation from me. "You left us in a remote hotel knowing we'd be in trouble. The worst part is on you. We were humiliated and suffered losses, so we'll demand proper compensation. I thought you might be a woman of low character to be abandoned by your husband, but now I see it's because of your attitude. It's your mother's fault for raising you this way. You both are responsible and will pay," Mary said, directly insulting my mother. Furious at Mary for directly insulting my mother, I was about to step towards her. But my mother held me back by the shoulder and responded to Mary with a smile. "You should remember that my husband died, but I suppose someone who expects their daughter to pick them up after such behavior wouldn't remember. Sorry, I misunderstood you. My husband passed away in a traffic accident." My mother replied with a low voice I had never heard before. Startled by my mother's assertiveness and realizing they were being mocked, Jack's face turned red with anger and he almost attacked her. Then a man rushed over to the tent scene. This man was my mother's new husband, my new father, whom she had married last month. Without paying any attention to Jack and the others, he calmly said, "Now that she's divorced, she's a stranger to you, so let's go home," and urged my mother and me to get into the car. His appearance agitated the in-laws, especially Jack, who was stunned and in disbelief. It made sense, as Jack knew my mother's new husband. He was the manager of a company that placed large orders with Jack's workplace every month. Jack, as the contact person, visited his company twice a month, so they had met several times a year. "So you are my daughter's husband," he said, clearly recognizing Jack as an enemy to his daughter. Jack, realizing he was recognized, laughed it off and started apologizing to my mother, but my father ignored him. He smiled only at my mother and me, urging us to get into the car before quickly driving away. On the way home, my father spoke to my mother. "That was unpleasant, wasn't it? He apologized to us, but not to our daughter," he said. I realized then that Jack hadn't even said sorry to me. Since then, Jack has been contacting me repeatedly, begging for reconciliation and apologizing. Apparently, my father's company had stopped doing business with Jack's company. Blamed for losing an important client and isolated at work, Jack was at risk of having to resign. He insisted it was all my fault and that I should apologize and mediate a renewal of the business relationship. But my father had never mentioned the business deal, not from the beginning to the end. He had not stopped the deal because of the issues between me and my in-laws. Jack blamed me, but he had brought this result upon himself. When Jack visited my father's company to apologize, he begged the contact person to call my father to the scene and then apologized there. Jack, under the misconception that I had influenced my father to stop the business dealings, desperately pleaded with my father's company's contact person and other employees, begging them not to end the trade. Furthermore, after returning to work, Jack repeatedly made phone calls and visits during work hours, and eventually waited for my father's return home to keep apologizing. Of course, to my father's company, it was unclear why they were being apologized to, and it was troublesome. Jack's actions became known among his superiors. Eventually, Jack was removed from his assignment by his boss for his excessive behavior. This was the result of his thinking that I had caused the trade stoppage, and not considering others' inconvenience and his self-preservation. I ignored all of Jack's reconciliation attempts and chose an appropriate moment to change my mobile phone number. This allowed me to completely cut off any contact with Jack, who had persistently tried to reach me by changing his address and number. After spending some time at my parents' house, I moved into an apartment nearby to avoid disturbing my newlywed parents and started a new life. Once everything was settled, I demanded compensation through a lawyer for Jack's violent behavior and unfair treatment, right when Jack had left his job. Desiring to sever ties quickly, I demanded a lump sum payment, which led Jack to use his recently received severance pay as compensation, resulting in him leading a meager life without a job or severance money. His parents, who were always extravagant with money and had decided to live with their son in the hopes of being supported by him, had almost no savings. Thus, the three adults found themselves in a difficult situation. Later, I heard from a former colleague that the business dealings had resumed, and Jack, believing the damage was now nullified, demanded to be reinstated at his company. Jack is likely to continue living a difficult life for some time. On the other hand, having been freed from my in-laws, I started a job through my father's introduction. The new workplace is a subsidiary of the company where my father works, and a position had just become available due to someone's retirement last month. However, as a new employee, I am desperately trying to remember the names and faces of my colleagues and superiors, and there's a lot about the job that I don't understand yet. Despite the increased busyness, being treated as an individual has made my life feel very fulfilling. I hope to continue at this pace, forget about Jack and his family, and move on with my new life.